council meeting for today, Wednesday, April 23rd. I'm calling this special meeting of council for the purpose of receiving a presentation on asset management and holding a closed session for potential litigation, staffing matters, and QP negotiations. Okay. I'll confirm that we have a quorum and the municipal clerk is here. And the meeting is starting at 9:32. The territorial land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that the Township of Alma-Calderman is located on the Mississaugan-Ashaninbenk territory and is the traditional territory of the Mississaugan-Ashaninbenk. The Township of Alma-Calderman respectfully acknowledges that the Mississaugan Nation are the collective stewards and caretakers of these lands and waters in perpetuity, and that they continue to maintain this responsibility to ensure their health and integrity for generations to come. Next, we have the approval of the agenda, and before I read that off, we do have an addition. So we'll have first of all, have to have a motion to waive the notice provisions to include a closed session for Senior of the Year nominations. So can I get a mover and a seconder to do that? Moved by Deputy Mayor Stover, seconded by Councillor Booth. All in favor? That motion is carried, and then we'll move on to the agenda. With that added, that the agenda for the special council meeting held on April 23rd, 2025, as amended, be approved. Mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Booth, seconded by Councillor Ainsworth. All in favor? That's carried. Disclosure of pecuniary interest or general nature thereof? Seeing none, that'll be noted. And we're going to start off with our presentation. And I'd like to introduce to you and the public, anybody that haven't met, Mr. Anderson, Dave Anderson. He's from 4 Roads Management Services. And by going by this, I'm going to assume, and I guess everybody else can too, you're an expert in roads management, and that's what you're here to do today for us. So,
thank you. I've spent a lot of time in roads management.
Okay, that's good. Where are you from, sir?
I'm from Kitchener.
Kitchener, okay.
Where to stand up. Okay, that yeah, mine's on.
Yep.
Whatever you did there, David.
Is that working? Yes. Perfect.
Okay, I think we're good to go then. Thank you very much for the opportunity to do this presentation. This is first presentation is generic. It's not specific to Alma-Calderman. It has a fairly long history. and you'll see in the next slide my history. Anyways, I began this presentation in 1998.
Hmm.
And I finally finished it. No, I'm just kidding. But no, I've updated it. The first presentation would have been to the region of Haldeman Norfolk, where I was the roads manager. And I have updated it every year, and I do presentations to Good Roads, University of Waterloo, and et cetera. So that's the genesis of it. It's gone back a long way and updated on a continuing basis. My history is I've been around for as long as as old as I look, I guess, on here. I was a municipal staff person for over 30 years. I've been consultant for over 18 and 12 on my own as for roads. I've done approximately 300 asset management, minimum maintenance standard compliance, and service delivery review projects as a consultant and a staff person. So this is my map of Ontario, and I've worked with about 60 municipalities.
60?
60.
Oh,
I have over 60 databases on my machine. That's how I kept track. So I've worked with over 60 municipalities. Some municipalities I've done very frequently. I think Durham Region might be 17 times, Halton Region 15, Clarington 6 or 7 times, and so on. So smallest municipality be 4 kilometers, the biggest would be 2,000. So I've looked at and worked on all kinds of different sizes of asset groups.
Dave, who would be your 4-kilometer municipality?
A little place called Kerwood down in southwest Ontario, and I think it's still in Lambton County down there. And I was in Petrolia just last week, so they've been a client for a while. So today we'll talk about a high-level asset management perspective, define it, look at our Ontario perspective, and we'll look at the overview and the cycle. We'll talk a little bit about software, and I know you've got software. Inspection, rating methodology and data, the treatments, the effects, asset classes, budget program, and plan development through performance modeling, which is really performance modeling is how do we develop a work plan and develop that work plan in accordance with Regulation 588-17. I've got additional attachments there, which I didn't send this time, but I can provide those. You've probably all seen OREG 588-17. And Dave, if you remind me, I'll send those other two. I might have sent those to you and Stefan earlier this year. So what do we do at municipalities? We are in the business of delivering services, and service delivery is dependent upon assets in good condition. So basically you have roads, bridges, water, sewer, rec facilities, offices, depots, ball diamonds and fields and things like that for soccer, fleet, parts, etc. So maintenance of good assets in good condition is critical to ensuring our service delivery, and almost every aspect of service delivery falls under that asset management umbrella. So many different agencies have many different definitions, and at one point I had about 12 definitions in this presentation. I never ever read them all, but the point was just to illustrate the commonality between them. So I've settled on this one. It's from a while ago, 1999. Spoiler alert, there is nothing really new going on in asset management. All the theories, et cetera, are pretty much founded decades ago. But the definition is asset management's a framework for making cost-effective resource allocation, programming, and management decisions. It combines engineering principles with sound business practices and economic theory, and provides tools to facilitate a more organized, logical, and comprehensive approach to decision-making. And we can, even although that's TAC that's come up with that, this definition can be applied to any asset. Of those 12 definitions that I used to carry, there was key themes to all the definitions. It was all about managing, being strategic, effective, efficient. For sure, it's about money, and lots of it, because this is public works, and all of our, even recreation facilities are fairly expensive. So it's about service delivery, optimizing our asset life cycle, and risk management on a couple of different levels. In Ontario, we had a regulation that came into effect December 27th, 2017. Prior to that, if I went back 30 years, we used to get conditional grant funding, and we used to have to do a condition review of the road system every year and report that to MTO, and that is how we got money, and that disappeared 30 odd years ago. Now we have an asset management regulation that we're to follow. The different steps were required a strategic asset management policy by July 1st, 2019, core asset plan for July 1st, 21, and then it was revised to 22, and then an asset management plan for all assets by July 1st, 2024. So it requires you need a further update to your asset management plan by July 1st this year that includes your level of service targets. So you have to come to grips with what service level do you really want. The policy requirement is more than a typical municipal policy. I think it's got to have a few harder edges into it and specify things like what is a level of service instead of something general that would say we would keep all our assets in good condition. Well, what is good condition for a certain asset? Is it a 70? Is it an 80 or whatever? So I think that policy has to be refined. You did have a policy from 2019. It has a 5-year limitation on it, so I think that has to be updated. The policy is a big rock. So I'm a big fan of Stephen Covey. So I put my pile of rocks in there. So he always says, put the big rocks in first. And the policy is a big rock. It is how you're going to manage your business. I would suggest, though, you got to read the asset management policy requirements carefully before finalizing the policy, particularly the service level implications. Updates required. Don't wait till the deadline. You can update the policy sooner. Or if you feel comfortable with doing that, or your municipality has evolved enough to get there. So this is just a cut and paste from the regulation, and basically there's a couple of key points I want to highlight here. Is we want to maintain the current levels of service, regardless of what your current service level is. You want to maintain it in at least that condition for 10 years. And how do you do that? Preferably, your plan has to have life cycle activities that can be undertaken at the lowest cost to maintain that current level of service. So it's about keeping the service level or the condition of the asset group, regardless of what asset group we're talking about, and in that same condition, hopefully improving it. So to adequately address those requirements, 4Roads suggests a performance modeling software will be required. I'm not sure if that is in the software you have because I haven't looked at that particular package too closely, but there are 3 or 4 packages out there that do have a performance modeling component. The asset management plan has to be signed off by the executive lead and council. So remember I said it's got to keep the assets in good condition. So you have to demonstrate that you're spending enough money and your plan is going to keep the assets in good condition. Every asset management plan under section 5 or 6 updated under section 7 must be, and this is a cut and paste that's basically reinforcing what I've set up here, endorsed by the executive lead of the municipality and approved by a resolution passed by the municipal council. So the asset management plan has to sustain the condition of the assets, has to be approved by executive lead, approved by council, and the status has to be reported on annually. So I think you have to go back and say, here was our plan, here's what we did, here's how it affected the condition of the assets. So I'll say it probably a couple of times through the presentation, but asset management is dynamic. So it's a snapshot of here's what we have right now, and here's the report on it, because something as simple as one unit cost changing can have an effect or a ripple effect through your entire plan. What would the annual expenditure be, for instance, if granular material went up $2 a ton? So that ripples through and has an effect on your plan. So we have other regulations affecting asset management, and these are just for reference, so I will not read through them all, but there are a lot of regulations that do affect just asset management. So needs studies, or state of the infrastructure as we call it in regulation 588-17, it's not a new concept. MTO introduced that to municipality in the 1970s. It was called a roads needs study. Some municipalities still call it a roads needs study. The essence of it, and to keep the language consistent with the regulation, it's a state of the infrastructure, whatever you want to call it, that's what it is. It's measuring that, same as your OSIM reports, that's a state of the infrastructure for your bridges. So MTO introduced that to municipalities in the 1970s. And then you're all parents, I assume, so it's your job to frustrate your kids. So one year, one of my kids gave me a book, and everything is about roads and assets for me. So in the middle of this book that was written in the 1850s, it said every year there's a constable's ride to survey the state of the roads. So roads need studies, and condition is not a new thing. Still a good idea though. So from the this was a document produced in 2012, and it was building together an asset management plans and strategic document, et cetera. But from that state of the infrastructure that forms part of your overall plan, we'll know our current levels of service and we'll know our current improvement costs. The asset management policy should provide that target level of service. Knowing the current level of service and the target, a strategy can be developed. And then we develop the financial plan. That's an important step in there. Knowing the level of service and the target, then the financial plan. So what it did also say in the same document is asset management requires a thorough understanding of the characteristics and condition of infrastructure assets as well as the service levels expected from them. So that's an important takeaway is like asset deterioration is basically the laws of physics in action. So they're kind of indisputable. Once you've decided what your plan is going to be based on what you anticipate to happen, finally requires the development of a financial plan. So it's the plan, the physical plan, followed by the financial plan in order to maintain it. So if you have an underfunded plan, it's a plan to fail. Frequently what happens with a lot of municipalities is they want to create a plan around their existing budget. And that's really not what we're talking about in asset management. You need enough money to sustain the condition of the asset. So you could create a plan, but it'll be underfunded and it'll be a plan to fail. So it's essential that we understand when we've got to do certain activities, what it costs, and integrate that into the program.
Is the level of service, has it changed over the years, or has it been mandated consistently through each province? Does each province change their level of service? And how is that regulated?
Well, there is, it's generic, the way it's spoken to in the regulation. So 1995 and previous, there were standards in terms of system adequacy from the province, meaning that was just the ratio of the roads that were not poor to the whole system. So for a lower tier municipality, 60% adequacy would have been satisfactory. So that would have meant 40% of your roads are in poor condition, which isn't a high bar to meet, but that was the standard. Moving forward, when we got rid of conditional grants, then effectively it got rid of that standard because you didn't have to meet that standard or have a work plan that was going to improve your road system until fast forward 20 odd years. We came out with Building Together in 2012 and then the regulation in 2017. So it's generic in the regulation because it says your level of service. You as a council have to come up with a level of service. So depending on what methodology you are measuring your system, because if you use a different rating methodology, and I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes, you will get a different answer. And so for instance, if you're using the inventory manual, which is my preference, and if you multiplied the structural adequacy by 5, you'll get a number out of 100.
Sorry, I don't have your,
That's okay.
I don't have all that knowledge.
Oh, trust me, it took decades to beat it into my head too. So don't worry about that. I'm just saying there's a methodology, but if I use this other methodology called SBO 24 for your hot mix road, a 55 in that methodology would be about the same as a 35 in the inventory manual. So all I'm trying to say is you can't set a standard for level of service without knowing what your scoring system is. So the standard that you want to meet will be reflective of your scoring system. I do have a slide that speaks to that a little bit later as well. So what is asset management? An asset management system. It's not just the software. This software that you buy, you got to remember it's not Windows. There aren't 11 billion or whatever licenses to this. There might be, for the software that I use, I think when they're at their peak, they might have had 200 licenses across Canada. And to build the software and make it works when you get it, but there's a lot of input that's required in terms of what your scoring system is, et cetera, to make it functional for you throughout, to develop your asset management plan. So what is that asset pavement management? It's a decision support tool. It identifies sections or elements needing treatment, finds cost-effective appropriate treatments to apply at any given time within imposed constraints. The imposed constraints are generally the budget. This is from ISO 55000, and it's a little cleaner on the next slide. And what it's saying is asset management system is a set of interrelated or interacting elements to establish asset management policy, asset management objectives, and processes. So asset management system might be somewhat akin to a standard operating procedure, but you see, we manage the organization, which manages assets, and then we have our system, and we have our asset portfolio. So there's more to an asset management system than just the software. Why do we need a pavement or an asset management system? Because we need to protect our significant public assets. In a lot of municipalities, such as yours, lower tiers, your biggest asset is probably the roads, and your second biggest might be the buildings, but it might be bridges. Depends on the nature of your municipality. And there's always those competing demands for funding within the agencies. So we have to present defensible positions for funding requirements and achieve the best value for available funds. So that should improve our decision-making by all, that's pavement management system users, and from a technical, financial, and political perspective. So asset management affects all of us in maybe different ways, whether it's political, programming, budgeting, and financial engineering or asset management. And we look at these details down the side: system composition, condition, strategy, coordination, all those things. So basically, most levels of a municipal organization will derive some benefit from having that system. Another spoiler alert, it does take a lot of hours to set up the system. So the software that I use, just the deterioration curves and performance modeling part of it, I stopped counting at 120 hours. So that's how much effort has to go into a software that already works. So, and I did the same in another product called Dayton DTIMS, but it's, or people that work with me, we were doing it in parallel. The point being, it takes significant effort on this type of software to make it functional for your purposes. Asset management is current and future costs. PSAB, you probably hear a lot about, and we talk about PSAB, and PSAB is completely different from asset management. If we looked at it as PSAB is looking backwards and historic, and asset management's looking current and forward. If I looked at a tandem dump truck purchase, and Stefan's still here, he'll see that this number's significantly different than you pay now. I think you're in the 400 plus range, but from the vintage I prepared this slide, 250,000 made some kind of sense. But for simplicity, if we started to look at what that costs, we got our purchase costs, and we got 1,000 hours of use a year, 10-year life cycle. That makes the numbers easy. It's $25 an hour for capital depreciation. At the end of that 200 life cycle, there's $250,000 in reserve. That's a problem, because even with 2% inflation, it'll be worth about 305,000. So we're 55,000 short. So it just kind of reinforces the idea you got to have an equipment rate, and you got to have an appropriate equipment rate, and you got to adjust it every year to account for inflation. So at the end of the day, you're not scrambling because Public Works needs to buy a piece of equipment and there's no money in the reserve, or there's insufficient funding in the reserve. You want to be able to say, this is what it costs us to do work, and part of that cost goes into reserve, and now there's money in the bank, so to speak, when we want to buy a new piece of equipment. Similarly, if I looked at unit costs for different activities, I actually did the report on this municipality as a staff person in 2000, 2001, and then came back as a consultant 12 years later. And guess what? They had kept their budget the same. Here's what happened to the price of surface treatment: is it went from $1.35 to $2.70. It doubled, but their budget stayed the same. This is a large municipality, a little bit over 2,000 kilometers. The point being is holding that budget to zero means effectively that you're doing 50% as much work every year as you had planned to do, say, 12 years before that. Similarly with asphalt, went from $48 to $80 a ton, and the budget did not change on that. So effectively, you're doing less. The budget stayed the same, but you're driving towards a cliff, because you're not going to be able to do the replacement or the overlays on the cycle that you need to.
Dave, just looking back at, sorry for being.
That's okay.
But I know with the different conferences some of the councillors have gone to, they've come back with new ways of looking at road surfacing and that sort of thing. And you're just sticking to those two, but are you also looking at different ways of applications for roads other than what used to be done?
Oh, yeah, there's lots of, yeah, I just use those for simplicity and for example purposes. There are lots of different techniques and technologies out there that people use. Some people, will hit a certain point in the life of a hot mix pavement. And right about the point where you might pave it or just a little bit better condition that, you microsurface it. And that'll extend the life 3 or 4 years. Some municipalities are converting their gravel roads and they're using surface treatment with a fiber mat in between. So it's like surface treatment, fiber, and then surface treatment on top, which provides a really good wearing surface, which is a little bit different technology as well.
And is it financially better for the application? Like, because we're all looking at doing better, getting more bang for our buck.
Right. So there are advantages to doing these things, but adequate funding is primary. So when you do that conversion, in this case, the municipality is converting their gravel roads to hardtop, which is another whole presentation, but it's, the road has to be structurally sound before you put a top on it. You can't just put a top on a road that breaks up in the spring. If it's a gravel road and it has soft spots, those soft spots will translate into broken spots next spring. So you have to look at, and this does change, right? So you have to have set up your own self what the cost is and where's your breaking point. So for instance, decades ago, in 2001, I wrote a report for Haldimand County. I was the manager of engineering, and we had 1,440 kilometer road system, over 400 kilometers of gravel, and I was spending 50% more maintaining those roads than I was a hot mix road. Okay, and so, but it all depended on what's the price of gravel, right? So there's that, and that's where I'm heading with that example is at some point you have to see what the price is. So if the unit cost of a certain item goes way up, then it's no longer cost effective to use that as a treatment, right? So if you're doing only a small quantity of one of those treatments, then the unit cost will go up, which then, yes, it's a viable alternative, but your unit cost went up too much to make it viable for you. Say if you're doing 10 kilometers, it becomes viable. If you're doing 500 meters, it's not viable, right? So those are the considerations, I think, when you're going through this.
Just a quick comment. You've gone to 12 years there and you can add another 12 onto that. That's where we'd be right about now. So instead of 270, you'd be up to 550.
Are you paying that much for a single? That's a bit.
I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying that what could be that.
Yeah, I should sit down, 550 for a single. No, I think it's, a lot of municipalities are paying around $4 for a single surface treatment and yeah, 4 for a single and 8 for a double. So it hasn't quite kept up with that. I just used that because I worked in that area for 15 years. So I was pretty familiar with what had gone on. So I felt, okay to use that information. Where does performance modeling fit into the regulatory requirements? I believe you need it. It's integral to the development of the work plan. And 58817 says maintain the condition of the system for 10 years. Now, there's a lot of people discuss this and think you have to have a 10-year work plan. And I would disagree with that. Because there's other parts of the regulation that say you got to have condition data that's no more than 2 years old. So you don't want to have condition data that you took today and relying to make a decision 10 years from now. My takeaway on this is the budget is the bigger driver for the 10 years. So I would take what your existing inventory is and say, hey, based on what you have, the budget should be here. And that's what you need to ensure you got for 10 years because your OREG 10497 for your bridges says I got to look at bridges every 2 years. So you're not going to say, I looked at those bridges, but I'm not going to do anything because I got a plan for 10 years. I think it's important to update the conditions and make sure you got the funding at the right level. That way you have the flexibility to move. As I said earlier, asset management's dynamic. So we have to look at, well, here's our current information. I should do something on this bridge sooner rather than later because everything, and I'll show you the deterioration curve a bit later, everything costs more if we wait. So I think it's It is dynamic. I'm overusing the word, I know, but it's like based on, you know, whatever we're seeing now and updating on that regular basis, and that helps you make your decisions. The important thing is to have a budget or a funding level that's satisfactory to sustain the asset group. The outcome of any asset management plan should be, as an absolute minimum, to maintain the overall condition of the assets being managed. That has been in my presentations for about 25 years. And it's essentially the directive of 588-17. So as I said, there's nothing new in asset management. You got to have a plan that's at least going to keep the condition the same. And this is achieved through optimizing available funding through appropriate treatments and cross-integration of asset programs. What I mean by that is that won't happen much for you, but in a lot of places I'll drive through and I'll go, oh, this looks like a resurfacing job, but let's see what the water and sewer is doing. So it could be a resurfacing project from a road perspective, but it then becomes a reconstruct because the water and sewer needs replaced. So let's do that all at once. And that's what I mean by cross integration of asset programs. So asset management is holistic on a number of levels. There's people, there's council at the highest level, and then there's different departments. And with asset, there's that interrelationship between assets and the decisions about treatment or replacement, as per my example on that last side, the road in an urban area where you might want to do the water main and sanitary sewer at the same time. So asset management is really interesting because it can be super complex, but it can be simple at the same time. And I think we have to look at it in an iterative process and we can look at the detail, but we have to pop our heads up every now and then and see where we're going. So the detail is, oh, here's what roads we're doing this year, or what bridges we're doing this year. But every couple of years, we look at the whole inventory and rate the condition, and we see, you know, what direction we're going. I'm going to steal a little story from Stephen Covey again, where he talks about this guy manager was hired to cut a path through the woods. And he got out there and he had everything, you know, all the saws and axes and everything were sharpened. He was making good progress. He got out to about day 3 and he said, let's see how we're doing. Because I think measuring it, we're doing great. So somebody climbed a tree, put a ladder up a tree, looked out and said, we are doing great, but we're going in the wrong direction. So I think we really have to keep measuring what we're doing. And that condition updates is going to tell us the big picture. Here's the overall condition. Are we winning or losing? And it is dynamic, as I've said probably far too many times now. It's not one event at a time, has to be ingrained into the work processes daily, weekly, monthly, annually. All too often what I see is people get an asset management plan, they go, oh, now I got to do the budget. And it's like they're one and the same. What's in the plan should be what flows into the budget. You don't have to do it twice. So the concept of the plan being dynamic, though, has to be instilled throughout the organization. Regardless of the asset type, we're going to do our data collection. We're going to look at the system or asset group condition, do that needs analysis. This is a sample of several different performance models. Sorry, Dave. And then we implement the program and repeat. So that's what's dynamic about it, is we got to keep doing that. It's not once every 3 or 4 years. It's how we have to live and how we have to manage the assets in the asset group. So in order to optimize available funding, service life and treatments have to be undertaken at the appropriate condition. So this is what I call a deterioration curve. This is just for different traffic volumes of hot mix roads. So a lot of yours would be on this curve because it's less than 1,000 cars a day if you got hot mix on it, and you can see, but the trigger point is the same. I'm going to resurface these roads when it hits that condition. So that's the important thing. We'll hit that condition at 9 or 10 years on a high volume road, like over 20,000 cars a day. And it will hit that condition around 17 or 18 years on that lower volume road. And then there will be an effect, and I'll talk about that later. It'll increase or hold the condition. If I looked at bridges, they're a little bit different because the scoring on a bridge considers, like, even if I fix the deck, it doesn't go back to 100 because the overall BCI or bridge condition index for a structure depends on the length of time that certain elements have been, or certain pieces, which are called elements, of the bridge have been exposed to the natural environment or those elements. So the right treatment at the right time is going to improve the performance. So if I looked at a bridge, if I did my wearing resurface rehab, It's going to extend the life. I let it deteriorate again. I'm going to do a minor rehab and then a major rehab. But effectively, if I use that point there, 60, which is usually a break point in BCI, thinking about seriously considering, should I replace this bridge or not? What we've done though is we've extended that 60 point out 40 years by doing the right treatment at the right time. So that's really the message in asset management. So this is just a bunch of different graphs. So this is more reflective of a local, something below a DOT or an MTO type road. This is more what would happen on a 400 series. This is from a lower tier municipality that I do work with regularly. And what I'm trying to illustrate here is that there's a different area, there's a blue line and there's a red line, and there's an area under the curve. And for those of us that remember calculus, I'm not on that list. I kind of forgot that decades ago, but they would call that area under the curve. It eases the explanation though. So you'd say here, well, if I built this is the same road actually. And if I built it and did nothing, I got a major rehab, and I built and then I did a major rehab again. You can see that over time, I have a significantly different cost to reach that 75 years. The area under the blue line is greater than the area under the red line, and I've got a better average performance. So it's about doing that right treatment at the right time. Perception versus reality. The perception is all we have to do is buy some software and push a button. Reality is quite different. There's significant effort. So the next probably 20 slides, I'm going to talk about the effort. And I think I'm saying this, and I do this training for a lot of different groups, is that has to be understood that it's not just plug and play. There's a lot of information that has to be put into the software. So this is from a document from the mid-90s somewhere. It was from SuccessFactors, the road management systems. But I underlined this here. What you need to implement your pavement management or asset management plan is processes, people, and technology. If you don't have one of those elements, it doesn't matter if you have the most expensive software. It will not, you will not be successful in implementing the plan. You have to have processes, people, and technology. The best technology in the world will ultimately fail if it's implemented in an environment where there are no people to run it, or where the processes are not in place to utilize it. So I refer to processes as standard operating procedures. Here's how we do stuff at our municipality. Asset management is a state of mind and an ongoing process. You got to understand what you need first. As asset management tools are required, but I don't get too excited because just a big dollar purchase may not be required. That most expensive software may not be the right solution for your municipality. So consider alternate service delivery strategies. What do we need to develop that plan? Preferably some software, condition rating, format methodology, accurate condition data. And this goes back to your question from earlier. We just need a methodology that we use at our municipality. For roads, it can vary. For bridges, you're using OSIM, Ontario Structural Inspection Manual. Treatments and their effect on the asset and their cost. And again, that leads back to one of your questions there earlier too, is what if I do this, what's it cost and what's it do to the asset? Does it extend it for 2 years, 4 years, or does it increase the condition? So we need to know how it's going to perform. We saw deterioration curves a little minute or two ago there. Performance modeling software to predict performance and budget requirements. And the most important, you need budget. You've already got software. I believe you bought software. Do you have a corporate software, but you have a public works software as well? Is that the idea? The one from Infrastructure Solutions. So is that corporate? Like does the finance department use that
No.
as well?
No.
Okay.
In theory, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Through you,
Sure.
Mayor.
Go ahead.
The interesting slide that you put up had the full circle and the continually full circle. And from your entire presentation, that is the exact pinnacle point that we have to implement, is the continuing full circle. So currently Yes, our asset management person is using software. Our treasury and township is using a different software.
Okay, that's
Then there is no integration.
great. So on that note, we all have to sing from the same song sheet. So the assets should be common, but I'll get to a slide that says you might need two softwares. Because I've worked with, so we'll go through this and then I'll talk about that for a second. So you have to consider who's going to use this. Is it easy to use? And another spoiler alert, none of them are real easy to use. Do I need to use more than one software? And I think you might end up, and most municipalities might end up there. Is it going to be used by engineering? What kind of databases do you have? What kind of setups do you have? Is it going to be used for performance modeling? And what is your evaluation methodology? Is operations going to put in their purchase orders to it, finance? And as Stefan suggested, use mesh for purchase orders and things like that. Integration with the general ledger and payroll. So that's important too. So that again, at the end of the year, finance and every other department have to come together so they can record the betterments on an asset at the end of the year for their reporting. So there's regulations from the finance perspective, there's regulations from the public works perspective, and both ends have to meet in the middle. And GIS system compatibility. So I think you do have GIS software as well, Esri. And that's a great tool because a picture does tell 1,000 is worth 1,000 words. And basically, if you can connect your database to a thematic map, you can do queries and show different themes of mapping. What's the surface type, et cetera? What's the roadside environment? What's the condition, et cetera? Not all products can be all things to all user groups. I work with a municipality on a continuing basis. They were my neighbors 35 years ago, and I've been their consultant for 17 years. And from 1995 to 2022, they were trying to select a software. 27 years later, we got it. We're there. But it was an ongoing battle to try and make everybody happy. And all softwares won't be everything to all people, is all I'm trying to say here. So there's information that finance might need, for instance. They might need the asset ID, the road name from to, the length, the width, replacement cost, and the needs. That might be all they really need, but the detail of the condition, the drainage, et cetera, is a lot more data fields. Like typically, I provide 50 to 60 data fields when I do this kind of work. So finance doesn't need all of that. They need to know those key things. So there should be an ability to integrate the softwares. So that higher price, as I said, may not guarantee success, or how you do things might be as simple as a spreadsheet. But you have to have sufficient trained staff resources to feed the monster. And the monster is the database. And once you got one, you got to feed it. I see a lot of municipalities go out for RFPs, and they'll be very similar to you, but they want a database created that has every sign, every cross culvert, less than 3 meter span, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's like prohibitive because you're going to spend a lot of money. And if you don't have people to feed the monster, you've wasted your money collecting all that information. So, cautionary notes as you go forward. So you might need more than one software depending on the complexity of their organization and the diversity of assets. The perfect one size fits all software may not be out there. So I've been dabbling in this. So I started work in 1975, but about 1986 or 7, I started doing road needs studies with the municipalities I work with. So I've been dabbling in this for a while, and I would be the first guy to tell you there isn't a perfect software out there. And one size software is definitely not there. So integration is important. So you can do your road stuff, your bridge stuff, your water and sewer stuff, and then just move up that higher level information into the corporate database and make sure that it's consistent. And the database should reside in a single location. Each asset should have a common ID for all departments, accessible by many. Key here is editable by few. Just because somebody can use a computer doesn't mean they should be messing around with the data. There are rules, and I go through this a lot where municipalities have brought in a summer student, for instance, and there's 6 different data entries to describe hot mix asphalt. Some of them actually say hot mix asphalt. Some say asphalt. Some say HCB. Some say HL6, which is a designation for a mix size, et cetera. But it's 6. So when you go to do a query on that, it's difficult then to say, oh, I have this many kilometers. So you have to have rules. It comes back to that standard operating procedure. And if you don't have rules and you have people just editing it because they, oh, you know, I learned that software at school, I can do that. You're going to end up with a database full of junk. That's the cautionary note there. Had a question earlier about condition methodologies, rating methodologies. Generally, there are a number of different rating methodologies for any asset type. If you're a big guy like MTO or one of the DOTs in the States, it might be agency specific or asset specific, or it could be a regulation. So back in 95 and before, we had a regulation that said you had to rate all your roads in accordance with, and I still have a copy with me, the inventory manual. So in a software I use uses that. But and that is the same methodology that you're Mr. Jewell, because I did know Gary Jewell. And his company used, and I think they've done the last 2 of your studies. So they use the same methodology. Different methodologies may all produce a rating 1 to 100, but the condition might be very different. So that's what I was getting at earlier. So for your agency, know and understand the rating methodology being used. Methodology should be part of your standard operating procedure. So just last week, a municipality came out with an RFP, and they said they wanted the road condition data, and they did not specify a single methodology. So you're going to get 10 consultants with 10 different methodologies, and it's like, well, how do you compare how we're doing? How do you measure success or failure, but success over time? It's like if we're scoring it differently in 2 years and another 2 years and another 2 years, the scores then become meaningless. So you have to have a consistent rating methodology that your organization wants to use. So you hear the term PCI bandied about a lot of time, pavement condition index. By definition, it's really just a measure between 1 and 100 of the condition of the pavement. It's only pavement condition. Only pavement condition. The inventory manual is a much more holistic approach because we're looking at a summary of 6 functional needs: geometry, surface width, surface type, structural adequacy, which is distress, which would correspond to PCI, drainage, and capacity. So that is a series of background calculations from probably 50 plus data fields that will produce those ratings for you. So there is a commonality though. There is a common theme: road surface data, so you can have ride and defects. PCI can potentially be a higher degree of definition. The inventory manual is a bit more general in terms of distress because we just rate the percentage of the length of the road that is showing structural distress. The PCI formula and weightings and number of stresses may vary between agencies, and it may also include a ride component. So some of them are just distress. Some of them are distressed combined with ride. So those are going to produce 2 different numbers. So you need to make an appropriate engineering decision. I lost my pointer there. More than just condition has to be evaluated because you have to know the width. Is it the right width for that traffic volume? Does it have drainage? Does it have appropriate shoulder width? And those kind of things. We need to know those things to make an appropriate decision. So regardless of, and that's what I just said, I guess, regardless of the methodology, a number of additional data fields are required to make that informed decision. Improvement recommendations based on condition alone might be critically flawed. The inventory manual or whatever methodology you choose can form part of your municipal asset management system, the standard operating procedure, and that standardizes the data input. So here's software that I use. This is what we call the Field Compact Edition. It's for field work. And you see here, geez, they look pretty close to the same. The difference is that says RIMS, which is the inventory manual. This says PCI. But look at all this other information. So I have structural adequacy here, and I have structural adequacy there. But what's different is I have a button at the bottom. It says DMI, Distress Manifestation Index. So here's where I get my detail. And so we have the detail on the types of defects, and then I can put in the ride condition rating, and then I roll it backwards. and it produces a structural adequacy, so I can enjoy the detail of PCI, but also have all of that other information, the lanes, the length, the width, what kind of curb I have, what kind of shoulder I have, all that kind of stuff. We need to have that kind of information to make a valid decision. So if I use an example, and I know I'm harping on it a bit, if you had a PCI of 70, which would be a structural adequacy of 14, typically that's a range you do a resurfacing, but if the road's too narrow, it's a reconstruct. If there's no drainage, it's a reconstruct. Unless you want to use just a single lift of pavement for a holding strategy. If there's a capacity need, then reconstruct with additional lanes. If the underlying data is all fatigue related, then a more significant rehab is required. If it's age related, it's a different fix. It's similar with structures. Asset management and improvement recommendations using a single parameter is critically flawed. Here's a number of methodologies that are in use in Ontario. And PCI methodologies change with the surface type. So SPO 21s for surface treated. That's a generic pavement condition for municipalities. 24 is for hot mix and 25 is for gravel. So depending on the surface material, you get a different rating because different materials fail differently. So you have surface treated roads and you have hot mix roads. When you drive down the hot mix road and it's thump, 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 you notice you don't really get those on surface treated roads. It cracks longitudinally. Hot mix cracks thermally. That's just physics in action. That's not a structural problem. That's not a bottom-up problem. It's a top-down problem. It's age-related. So that twigs in your mind. I don't need to fix anything under that. I just need to fix that, the surface material. So here's just trying to give some kind of comparison. And this is just strictly for asphalt, and then I didn't do it for the other methodology, or I think I do have a couple of slides coming up. But you can see at the top end of the curve, we're doing simple stuff, preservation, crack sealing, and then as the condition deteriorates, resurfacing single lift. But I just like to highlight in the different methodologies and the different scores, it's called something different. So this is good, fair, fair, fair. And then similarly here, the jog line between that subjective descriptor changes. Just to clarify, a 6 to 10 year need and 1 to 5 year needs, it's easier to explain when we're looking at this kind of graphic because people get confused. They'll see, oh, the recommendation is R1, resurface 1 lift, and it's a 6 to 10 year need. That's the recommendation, what you have to do right now. In the inventory manual, and I got to give a lot of credit to the Ministry of Transportation because the basis of that manual is from the 1970s. It's a prediction model. So if you have a road that's 6 to 10, what it's saying is in 6 to 10 years, it will be a broken road. That's what that means. So that interpretation gets confused a lot. It doesn't mean resurface in 10 years. It means it will be broken in 10 years. So there's quite a little bit of difference there. That is the language we're stuck with. People do have it in their heads, but it's when you put it up on a graph, you can see what it really means, right?
And that's what we're using now?
You're using the inventory manual, which is a score of 1 to 20 for distress,
Okay.
which is, you can relate it back to 100. So 14 is 70, you know, because if I told you 14 out of 20 is your score, is that easier to understand? Or if I told you it's 70, you get a bit better idea. You know what I mean? Relatability.
My question is so is that a 6 to 10 year that you do right now?
Yes.
Okay.
6 to 10 year, if it's a resurfacing recommendation.
Yeah.
If it's a drainage recommendation, it probably means you need some ditching work done on that section. So methodology comparison, surface treatment, there's a few less variations there, and they're pretty similar. And this is, there's 3 or 4 different gravel ones. This is what the inventory manual makes all kinds of sense to me. So basically at that top end of the curve, we're doing regrading and dust control. We get down a little bit. We're just going to add 75 mils. Condition gets a little bit worse over a longer period of time. We're going to add 150. And when it gets down to here, if we've done nothing, then we got to do something major, like add, 300 millimeters of gravel. We use OSIM or MBAIDS. MBAIDS is like OSIM light, not used so much anymore, but we use that for structures. Sadly, these are structures that I owned. I closed this one 3 weeks into Haldimand County. somebody called me and said, Dave, I know you just inherited this, but you got to look at this beauty. And I did. And there I am, January 20-something, standing under a bridge at 9 o'clock at night going, yes, indeed, this one, somebody did try to burn it down. So the story was they tried to burn it down. They closed it for 2 years and they opened it and they didn't fix anything. And at January, I got my flashlight and going, yes, this is charcoal under here. So I closed it that night. This was a bridge that was posted at 2 tones. 2 tones, it should just be closed. If that's a recommendation, if you got a Toyota Corolla and 4 guys my size in it, it's 2 tones. Just saying, to give you a perspective, like a Ford F-350 fully loaded is about 6 tones. So 2 tones is close it for safety reasons right away. Another one of my beauties just held together. And this was a bridge that was posted for no trucks. And we think it looked a little bit like the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner hour when the guy went across. We think it was an overloaded vehicle that went across that. And that is the police car at the far side. Oh, he was, we suspect, the wood broke up just as he drove by, you could see it going on, so. PAC P or WRC for sewers, standard rating methodologies. So every asset has different methodologies. You as an agency have to just say, here's what I'm going to do. Here's how we're going to do it here. So it's important to get accurate condition data because you're going to make multi-year, multi-million-dollar decisions based on that data. If you put garbage in, you will get garbage out. So the reviewer should have a sound understanding what a structural problem is versus non-structural. And I just gave you that example of the thump, thump, thump going down the road is not structural. It's just age.
Dave, are you finding that some municipalities come across a problem like a bridge? We talked about this in one of our meetings. We didn't have the money, and are municipalities just closing the roads because the bridge is gone and they don't have money?
There are a couple not far from me that have done that. One I did the gravel road inspection for a couple of years ago, and they had 15 bridges that were closed. Now, the big problem with that is primarily emergency service delivery, right? It messes up your winter control, which is a sort of an emergency. But if you have police and fire and those kind of, and ambulance, et cetera, and they can't go over the bridge and it's another 5 minutes to get there or 10 minutes or something like that, that's a prohibitive cost. So really have to be conscious of those. Similarly, if you have structures, and when I went through your database, I don't think you have any structures that are posted, meaning there's no load restriction. But if you have a posting on a bridge, you got to remember that I have my example of the Toyota Corolla fully loaded. But if you're talking a pumper truck for the fire department, they probably weigh around 30 tons. Dave might be able to help me with that one. Yes, around 30 tons. So if you've got structures that are posted less than that, you're in trouble. So in Haldeman, when we restructured, I had managed the regional road system. Our bridges were pretty good, but when the funding went away in conditional grants, all the lower tiers stopped looking at their bridges. So in 2001, it's like I had 270 structures over 3 meters, and I closed 6 the first year. First one I showed you, I closed. And then I got a structural engineer to look at it the next day. But then I had 5 more calls that went like, Dave, I got another one. And it's like public safety at risk there. So that becomes a real problem. Combined with that, I had probably another 20 structures that were posted at 15 tons or less, 10 or 15 tons. A fully loaded dump truck for winter control with a plow and full of salt weighs about 25 tons. So if you've got structures that are posted like that, you can't really drive your tandem dump truck over it because, they're not exempt. Those kind of things are serious service delivery impediments. Yes, the condition data collection is cyclical and it's an ongoing process. So what we want to do is we want to identify the structural inadequacies, describe its current condition. Based on its current condition, we can probably tell you how long it's going to last. We can prioritize the programming of a rehab or a reconstruction, determine the overlay thickness, determine the remaining life, and determine if you need a load restriction. Plan and program development is dependent on that accurate data and costs. Data collection should be conducted by trained personnel. So I'm sure that's a cutout from the 60s because I haven't seen a guy with a hard hat and a tie for quite some time. Preferably using that software product. But what do you need? Once you're done, you're going to have a bunch of standardized questions answered for you. You'll know what you have, where it's located, what condition it's in, what it's worth, what's cost to replace it, what's the useful remaining life, and what service level will be required over the service life. It's basic inventory information that's accurate. And again, if you put garbage in, you will get garbage out. Data collection is the root of good asset management, and it's a measure of current asset condition. It has to be collected efficiently. It has to be objective and accurate. And maintenance and rehab feedback is important to the analysis. So when I go to a new system I haven't done before, first thing I want to do is talk to the operations people. I want to know where water is over the road and how deep is it? Like, can you still drive through it? Or do you close the road? Because that will make it a 1 to 5 or a now need for drainage. I also need to know if I'm not, gravel roads, you really have to look at during spring breakup because they all look okay in July. So I really need, if I'm not looking at gravel roads in the spring, I need to know what the operations people are going to tell me about how is that road breaking up in the spring breakup. Where are your bad spots? As I alluded to earlier, as you get into this, don't go overboard with massive amounts of information because it's just data that might be stale dated by the time you actually need it. So get the core, get the basics, get that information in place, and then you can continue to supplement that. Editable by few, repeating theme, preferably only in one location. You do have to have an ability to extract the data into a spreadsheet or something, so you can do maybe a little bit further analysis. It could be in a cloud, it could be on site, it could be on a server on site, or with your software. Regardless of how you collect the data, if it's one of those $1 million vans or it's just me behind a windshield, there's a bunch of factors that affect the scoring. So the surface wetness, the sun angle, the time of year, rater fatigue, consistency between raters, procedures, quality control, and all of those factors affect windshield surveys or the semi-automated data collection. So here's factors that affect our condition and performance. You can see these are prize-winning gravel roads. Those are logs. So that municipality was telling me, yes, we put down 75 millimeters every 3 years. And it's like, no, you don't. If you were putting down 75 millimeters every 3 years, I wouldn't see logs from 150 years ago coming from the corduroy roads. I wouldn't see them coming through. So non-uniform soil, construction, compaction, frost susceptibility. If I used Haldeman Norfolk as an example, I'm not sure what the soils are like here, probably sandy as you get close to the lake. But in Haldeman Norfolk, we have the Norfolk sand plain and the Haldeman clay plain, except it's not really clay. It's a mixture of clay and silty clay and pure silt. Silt and silty clay are a real problem. So those are the ones that are kind of explosives. Some clays, but not that many. Environmentals, what's the temperature extremes, and really importantly, what's the traffic loading? Gravel roads are best evaluated during that spring breakup. In the summer, you're pretty hard to tell the bad ones. Greasing, because they've graded or touched up the gravel, operations staff knowledge is important. If your review is by a third party. Not all sections need to be inspected every year. The regulation says that your asset management plan has to have data current, condition data current within 2 years. So now I think we're into the mode where we're going to look at roads, maybe a bit more on that frequency. Back from 95 and earlier, the Ministry of Transportation provided the conditional grant funding. And we used to update our roads needs study, a major update every 4 years, but every year we'd look at a quarter of the system and we'd look at what was improved or what got worse faster than we anticipated in the other 3 quarters. So you had a relatively current database all the time. So sections with lower usage can be every 2nd or 3rd year and should be re-inspected on a regular basis. And as I said, OREG 58817 requires data to be no greater than 2 years old. Here's the data we need to develop a budget. I need dimensional information, lengths, widths, surface materials, and then this is condition data, so I need that to develop my priorities. So section length data to the meter would be good. It's easily achievable, I think, with GIS. For the manual, the closest 10 meters is satisfactory, and that's, again, the vintage the manual was written. The platform and pavement widths to the 10th of a meter. This is important to note because that information, if you have an accident on a road, that's what comes out in court. People still use, lawyers still use the inventory manual because they have listed in here minimum tolerable standards for road widths. The minimum tolerable standard for shoulder width on a rural or semi-urban road is a half a meter regardless. But you have minimum widths for the various traffic counts on the roads. So I think that's important to keep in mind because I have been called by lawyers asking those questions. How would I interpret this? So one of them was a low volume road from the edge of the rounding to the edge of the rounding was 5 meters. So the first lawyer's question was, how wide would you say that is? And I'd say it's 4. Because you have a minimum tolerable standard of a half a meter for a shoulder, so it's 4 meters wide. The minimum standard and I know I'm getting a little bit too complicated here, but it's 5 meters plus the half meter on either side for a low volume road. So then the defense lawyer called. This was all within a 24-hour period. He said, so, well, I'm going to tell him it's 5 meters wide. And I said, well, I just talked to this guy like within a day. He seems fairly sharp and he understands the manual. So if you tell him it's 5 meters wide, because he's trying to say, oh, our road width was fine, it was a driver problem. And I said, the other guy's pretty sharp. He's going to tell you, sure, you can have your 5 meters, but my client went off because there was no shoulders. Like it's using the manual against them kind of thing. So I think that's really got to be kept in mind. That field audit and the accuracy of the data that's there. We need unit costs. So there's all kinds of different units costs that we need, and depending on the improvement, we will use them, to develop a replacement cost or a resurfacing cost or whatever. Pavement condition, you can do additional evaluations. I wouldn't do these on your whole road system. I would do these when you get to the project status. Falling weight deflectometer is just dropping a weight on the road and measuring the deflection, measures that road carrying capacity. The ground penetrating radar, I took that was in the parking lot of one of my offices in Haldeman. Because I used to use that when I was doing a cold place recycling, because I wanted to know what the depth of the granular materials are. So when I pulverized it, I knew I could add a certain amount of gravel in certain areas and then just put the additional pavement on top. That's the kind of information that comes out of it, tells us the depth of materials. This is the ground penetrating radar. That's obviously a core. And that's how the falling weight deflectometer actually works. It drops that weight. There's 7 geophones, and you can see the deflection is different. Deflection is going to be different, or the allowable deflection is different depending on the type of road it is. So if it's a high volume road in truck route, it's going to have very minimal deflection, but on a local residential, a greater amount is permitted. Just from an acceptance perspective, so in Ajax, when I worked in Ajax, it grew from 19,000 to 55,000 people in the 5 years I was there. And we started to use the grandfather of this tool called the Binkelman Beam as an acceptance tool. So it would be, I'm not going to accept your roads if they fail the Binkelman Beam, which would be this. So it was an acceptance criteria, build it right or we're not. And that brought the quality of the roads up quite a bit.
Excuse me, Dave, again, you're talking about paving roads. So we have county roads and we have our municipal roads.
Yep.
And I'm just kind of going up and down the roads. And I guess I could ask you this, Dave, what paving roads do we have that we would pave a road? I don't think we have any, do we?
I think you have in one of your databases quite a few kilometers of hot mix pavement.
So that would be the same thing.
Yeah, hot mix asphalt is,
Not, and that's not a county
it's not on a county road. In the information I've looked at, you do have surface treated like tar and chip, and you do have hot mix asphalt roads, and you do have gravel roads.
road. Thank you.
In Grafton, there are some paved roads.
Through you, Mayor,
Okay, yes,
Deputy Mayor Stover, you also have, so what Dave was just speaking to, excuse me, before we would accept the road. So this is an area of our subdivisions that we have going in.
Yes.
That we would require that the roads are to a certain standard before we would accept them. And we need to make sure that they are built right.
Yes, and,
Mary Catherine?
oh,
Yes, just to
Sorry.
follow up on that, because some of those agreements were made 30, 40 years ago. Is there a mechanism to say, well, what was agreed to at that time isn't what we want at this time?
I would think probably no, like you have a development agreement and then when everybody's a happy camper, you assume the roads, and once you've assumed the roads, you're on your own.
No, the road hasn't been assumed yet, but by the time the development finishes, I think of the one down the Glens of Antrim, the initial agreement was for a very thin pavement and not really the best practice, but it was agreed to many, many years ago.
I think you'd have a great deal of difficulty chasing them up on that because 30 years is beyond the life expectancy of a surface, like the surface lift anyway. You're probably, that's
We
only,
never even assumed.
no, I get that, but there is going to be that statute of limitations to some extent, I think. Because they would have priced their lots based on, here's what I'm going to construct. So if you come back at those same guys 30 years later and say that wasn't acceptable,
Right. 'Cause the road would
You'll be-
built at that
you'll be
point.
spending more money on lawyers than,
For you, Mayor, to council. So this is why we have identified in the strat plan that our planner is reconsidering and redoing the new agreements for our township for the developments so that we do have this the roadway encompassed in it. And as an example, the Glens of Antrim that Councillor Neal mentions, it was in the agreement that it was only one layer of asphalt. So we want to make sure that things are done well.
So when we're out looking at any asset, the segment condition is established through whatever rating methodology we choose. The improvement needs are established through the evaluation process, and the system rating can be considered that level of service measure. So we talked earlier about system adequacy, and now we can talk about what's the average. Well, if I took the average of all the ratings, that's going to be misleading potentially, because if I had a short length of 100 meters, and you probably have some section lengths that are 2 and 3 kilometers long from intersection to intersection. If the long one scored 100 and the short one was 100 meters, it scored 50. The average is 75. That's not really representative. So what I usually do is I do the average of ratings weighted by the length. So then I would take that 100 times the 2 kilometers and the 50 times the 100 meters. It's going to give you, so then your average is going to be in the 90s somewhere, not 75. So I think that's better. And that system adequacy, I alluded to it earlier. There wasn't a slide on it, but it's the ratio of the fair, good, and excellent assets to the entire system. That measure as a standalone measure can be very misleading, because if your trigger for a now need or a poor road was 35, if all of your roads scored 36, you're 100% adequate. And next year, you will be 0% adequate. So you have to have, when you're doing your policy and you're updating your policy and you're talking about level of service measures, every asset may have more than one level of service measure. The ratio of good to fair roads, like which roads are in that certain condition, it's going to paint a fuller picture of what you want for your municipality. So I did allude to this graphic earlier because it's a perfect graphic because there are no numbers for age or per pavement condition. It's from the Transportation Association of Canada and Pavement Asset Design and Management Guide. And what it's saying here, so regardless of the scoring system, so if your trigger for resurfacing was 50, then the average network condition should be above 50. If it's 70, it should be above 70. If I wanted to apply that to a bridge network or group of bridges rather, a minor rehab is a score, or rehab's around 75. So a BCI of around 75. So I'd want to have the average BCI of all my bridges at 75 or above. So we can apply this concept to any asset. So once the data has been collected and QA, quality assured, system analysis can be undertaken. It's going to define accurately what we talked about before. So this list of 7 items is from the infra guide from the early 2000s. What do we have located, what condition it's in, what are the improvement costs, the current value, remaining life, and replacement cost, and then we can use that information to develop a work plan. From that database that we've created, we can start to extract information like what's our minimum maintenance classes and what's the length and what's the roadside environment, et cetera, what's the surface material and what's the lengths, et cetera. And we can start to look at a higher level. And from that information, even that high level information, we can start to look at, oh, if I got 59 kilometers of gravel road and I wanted to put on 75 mil every 3 years, then I can start to use that even high level information to develop a budget or a program level. I can go further with the information and start to look at that good to very good measure. I know it doesn't show up there, but I think you have the PDF for the handouts for this, or so you can start to look at, yeah, good to very good. I can also start to look at if I've done them, if your consultant has done your system several times, then you can start to look at, oh, how are we winning or losing? Here's what's happened with the structural adequacies over time. And you can see here in this particular system, from the 2013, we've moved to the left, meaning the road system has got poorer over time. So those kind of measures, if we're using the same rating system and we're doing it on a regular basis, we can now see if we're winning or losing. So in this case, we're losing. This is it's the same as previous slide, same system. But once you reach a certain level, it takes quite a bit to make it even worse. But when we're looking at it being at 70, and then in 2010, it was 53. 2019, I think I did it, it was 43.8. We're now starting to see that we're not spending enough money. The conditions are getting worse. And this is the hazard. If you're going to set your level of service at a certain level, if you set it too low, then your maintenance costs are going to be really high. You might have cured a capital problem, but your maintenance costs, you're going to be getting the calls, all of you, from, oh, I need this pothole fixed, or this is bad, or this is bad. So there's a delicate balance there between, where you want to be with your level of service in terms of the condition reading. So, and this was a municipality, I think it's the same municipality, yeah, 43.8, but you can see, here's when the lights went on. So their budget was prohibitively low, and then they started basically the budget quintupled, starting in about 2016 or 17, and you can see the effect over time. In 24, it's up, to 49 from 43.8. So that's a huge increase, but you can see the effect of it. It's still not a very good road system, but it's improved. So it did take money to do that. What I try to do is run a model, and I would say, here's how much money I have. Here's what, and you can see this is a fairly small system. We got $1 million. I always like to run a model with $0, because there's a tendency with some councils that say, oh, we're not going to spend anything this year because we're saving up for next year. But regardless of what you do, if you spend no money, the system will deteriorate that much in a year by itself. So you need to be on a constant upgrade and improvement process. I can maintain the system. The hazard with the maintaining is, in that model, is it looks good. Oh, we're at half the cost of capital depreciation. That half cost means you are not going to be doing any reconstruction. You are only going to be surface treating. You're only going to be doing gravel road resurfacing, et cetera. If you like the $500,000, but then want to turn around and do construction or do whatever you want, your system will deteriorate over time, right? So it's, yes, that is appealing because it's half, but it's only going to work for you if you do the right treatment at the right time. So from the model, here is my recommended improvements, and you can see, all I like to point out here is, like, when we run the model that's in accordance maybe with, not maybe, but with regulation 588.17, we're picking the right treatment at the right time to return the best and picking the treatment with the lowest life cycle cost, what we do is we have a variability between the costs every year, like pulverize and resurface with 2 lifts of asphalt, 366,000. 2 years later, 170,000, and then we don't touch that again. And then work that we've done in 2020 is going to translate into resurfacing jobs in future years, et cetera. So that's how the model will work. And that's a perfect world. We don't live in a perfect world. So what ends up happening is we run a model, and then the first draft is, here's what the computer says. And then there's, oh, we wanted to do this road this year. So I call those committed projects. I can plug in that project in that year. And I know what it's, if you're going to reconstruct it, it's going back up to 100. If you're going to resurface it, it might go up to somewhere in the 90s, depending on its existing condition. So then we can see, we can get the same line or performance. We can have your budget with the committed projects. And why I like to do that is because I often worry about the province saying, oh, you're not in compliance with the regulation, which is fairly easy not to be in compliance with the regulation in total. The key theme of the regulation would be to keep the assets at least in the same condition. So I'm dealing with one client, for instance, right now is a 1,100-kilometer road system. And the thrust of their projects and programs is driven by the water and sewers. So in the built-up area in their municipality, that's driving it all. But they are spending enough so that they can do that work in town, the roads in town in conjunction with the water and sewer, and still keep the condition the same. My feeling is then you could say, well, the thrust of the regulation is keep the good roads good or keep the overall system condition good, and you can do that. So when you're starting to talk about dollars in simple terms, it probably costs you 4 or 5 times as much to reconstruct that urban road versus the rural road or repave it. So you can balance it off that way. Treatments and costs. So understanding the treatment effect will translate into a return on investment and give you that area under the curb. It's very useful for program development, and really what the regulation is saying, that the work plan be developed using the lowest life cycle cost activities, is really the best return on investment is project selection. So each improvement type is going to have a different effect on the asset. Crack sealing doesn't improve the road. It maintains the condition or holds the condition. Resurfacing will increase the condition, but it doesn't become perfect. So if you paved it at the exact right time, like a 70, it might go to a 95. If you pave 2 lifts at a lower condition, it's going to bring it to 100, and so on. So those are the kind of things that we have to keep in mind with our project selection, and gets back to your question about the effectiveness of a treatment. So that's what we build into that. So we have our cost components, and then there's the effect on the asset. What's the treatment? It's going to bring it back up to 95 in this example, and it's an R1. I've got some, and in the R1 paving, a lot of times you hear the mill and pave. Really, you should mill it and then do base repairs and then put another lift on top, because an active crack will come through at about 25 millimeters a year, 1 inch a year. If you pave on top of an active crack, you're probably going to crack in the same spot in 2 years. So those are the kind of things to keep in mind. And then
Is that the same, excuse me, is that the same for treated roads as asphalt roads, surface treated?
surface treated tend to fail a little bit differently. Yes, cracks will come through, but they get a bit lumpy and bumpy before that crack actually comes through.
And you don't, what do you call it, tape? I have never seen anybody tape roads that it.
You don't,
cracks.
you don't crack seal surface treated roads, no. So yeah, this is just drilling down into the detail, which you really don't need to know too much. But basically it's using the information in the database, the length, the width, et cetera, to come up with a cost. The treatments and the effect on the asset. So this is from the MTO's pavement and rehab manual, and it tells you what they expect with different treatments, is the expected surface life extension, et cetera. This is what I do. This is Appendix C. If I didn't send that to you, Dave, like a couple of months ago when I was sending stuff, remind me, I will send that. But basically, it's different treatments will have a different effect. And that's how I have set it up. So the return on investment scenario is pure asset management. Basically, it's going to give us pick the right treatment at the right time based on condition. That's the formula. We don't need to go into detail on that. From that, we need to have asset classes and deterioration. And I would just preface all that by saying that you have to have quality throughout the entire process. If you don't have quality of design, materials, construction, and maintenance, that perfect deterioration curve isn't going to happen. So, and you got to remember, not every road will follow the curve. There'll be some above. That's an average. That's the average performance of a road. So, or any asset for that matter. So it really does depend on the design, materials, and et cetera.
Excuse me, Dave.
Sure.
And this is to you, Dave. Just wondering, you mentioned our typical roads here are going on about 1,000 cars a day. Is that typically across you did mention, the different classes and that 1,000 cars a day is an average for a lower class?
No, what I was saying was that one curve represented the anticipated performance for roads of 1,000 or less. So that probably is.
Is that kind of what our traffic volume, I know not up here, but different areas, is there a road count that you expect, or have we ever done road counts to figure out what the need would be for the road?
You can. We can both.
Through you, Mayor Logo. So data collection is something that Mr. Anderson is identifying here that is a definite need
Right.
to be able to manage your road infrastructure, your asset management.
That's a big
Yep.
Thank you.
section.
So not all assets will perform the same. This is, anybody ever been to downtown Waterford? It's just outside of Simcoe. So that, I built that bridge in 1998 or 9. This bridge was right beside it because that was my detour bridge. But you can see that's all steel. It's like a giant Meccano set. And this is a typical beam and girder and concrete type bridge. They will perform differently. That's the only message I'm telling you out of that. Because the materials are different, et cetera, they will perform differently. Different agencies have different asset classifications. A single agency may have many classifications for a same segment of road depending on the end user purpose. So they may suit a single purpose but not be appropriate for all purposes such as modeling. So what I've done is looked at road section or an individual asset will vary dependent on traffic, percentage of trucks, and agency-specific design standards. And yes, that's the underside of yet another bridge I closed in 2001. Oh, yeah. Deterioration curves will also vary. Documenting and understanding how agency roads are performed over time will produce a reliable deterioration curve that might be specific to your agency. So I said earlier in the presentation, it took me over 120 hours, that's when I stopped counting, to set up my performance modeling and the curves. So I looked at TAC, which is a great resource. And the thing that I saw was missing here is I have local and collector and arterial roads, which is great, but it doesn't specify a surface type. So a surface type is going to cause me a bit of a problem because the replacement cost is going to be very different with the different surface types. So then I looked at my all-time favorite, the inventory manual, same thing. It classifies it by traffic in the rurals and semi-urban sections and urban sections, but there is no definition there of maybe what the surface material should be. So what I said is, well, we got all these possible surface materials, we got these roadside environments, then I have all these subtypes in the manual, which would result in 400 combinations. And I said, I'm not building 400 deterioration curves. So I slimmed it down a bit and said, what I really need is the surface material, a roadside environment, and then I refined the traffic a little bit. So what I did was asphalt over concrete, RSU, so rural, semi-urban, urban. And then you can see I got a lot of HCBs, high-class bituminous 1, 2, 3, 4. They have different curves. So the rural and semi-urban will have different replacement costs than an urban, but the deterioration will be the same. So this just refined the classes, and once I had these set up, it's automated. Once they're set up, you can automatically assign it to an asset if you have the surface material, the traffic count, and the roadside environment. So that's an asset classification for maybe performance modeling or capital purposes, but we also classify roads, and this is a point I was trying to make, for different purposes. So we have regulation 23902, which classification is predicated on the traffic volume and the speed limit. And that changed, it's changed a few times. I was on the committee that wrote it once upon a time from 2007 to 2010. Then we were recalled in 2013 because of the Giuliani decision, a lawsuit to deal with ice on the roads. And but that defines what your service delivery should be based on the traffic. Reiterating, we need quality throughout the process. And how do we know that our agency materials perform? And understanding materials is key to understanding what the performance is going to be. So regardless of the system size, being able to predict performance will improve the effectiveness of the management. And it's going to vary with traffic, commercial trucks, pavement structure. So I get these things sent to me and I feel obliged to stick them in the odd presentation. So the question is, I got an asset right there in the middle of the picture. It's a car. How often do I change the oil in the car?
Never.
Never.
Every 3 months. Isn't it?
There we go.
My God, we have like 5.
But when you read the manual, it's either or. It says a mileage or time. So that's why you got to have, and it goes back like about 50 slides or so where I was talking about the person making the asset management decisions has to know and understand the characteristics of the asset. So you actually read your owner's manual.
Yeah, but I don't follow it.
But you knew it.
I know it.
So performance modeling based on pavement condition alone works well, and with potential, if the other defects or potential defects are satisfactory, if the drainage is okay, the alignment, the widths, platforms, et cetera. For most DOTs and MTOs type organizations, these things aren't near as big a problem as they are for lower tiers. Most regions and counties aren't too bad that way. But your municipal roads, and this might be the subdivision that you referenced, built prior to the 70s and 80s, growth may not be well documented and might not be constructed to a standard. So that is what happened in a couple of places I worked, those older roads. So you got to talk about cross-asset integration. I mentioned it earlier. The road allowance is really a utility corridor. It's water and wastewater, gas, hydro, sidewalks, and bike paths. A road that requires resurfacing from pavement perspective only may end up being a significantly different project once you heard in from all of the stakeholders. Here's our profiles, and to get back to your question there, so that was my 1,000 or less cars a day. I think we'll perform that way. 20,000 or more, I think we'll perform that way. So different rate of deterioration dependent on traffic, and particularly that higher volume one is going to have more trucks. So trucks, a transport truck has the same effect on the road as about 12,000 cars. Oh yeah, it's significant because it's a fourth power curve. It goes up like this. So when you add load, it's logarithmic or exponential rather. Here's that low volume profile that I built in and I use, and it looks a lot like the standard curve we talked about. We want to develop a budget. So just reiterating, what if I had a slate roof here? What if I had a shingle roof? It's going to be different. That's how we build the budget, is knowing what the asset, the composition of the asset is, and the anticipated performance. To test our models, we have to have an idea of what the budget should be, and that is a function of the constitution of the system and provides an order of a check and a magnitude and check. So it is a function of the information in the database. So we had a slide there that said, I need this information for budget. I need this information to prioritize. So how many kilometers of each kind of surface type do I have? What's the average life expectancy? And that's going to depend on your system, the original design, et cetera, and your maintenance. We need those same unit costs that we talked about earlier. And for instance, this is what we call maybe a standard calculation. If we looked at what we're going to do in a rural or semi-urban road, and we're going to do some fixing the base, and we're going to do 20% padding. In an urban area, we're going to look at curb and gutter and manhole adjustments, et cetera, to be part of that process. So this is, and importantly, what we add. And so my estimates may be higher than other estimates because we've included a basic construction factor, an engineering factor, a contingency factor, and a terrain factor. And they are added to the material costs, which is
Mhm.
more typical. Again, it gets more complicated. We get into an urban road system. It could be as simple or as complex as suits your agency. So we could look at your overlay program, could be as simple as how many kilometers of hot mix do we have? What's the average cost to resurface a kilometer and life expectancy? Again, for simple numbers, I use this and we had 500K of hot mix, $150,000 a kilometer, which is from a few years ago. Life, 20 years, which isn't real, but it makes a nice round number of 3.7 million. So you should use a similar process when you're looking at your bridge and culvert inventory. So the capital replacement, for you guys, you can get your database from the consultant that did it and then start to look at what's the deck area. And you can take that deck area and say, it's $12,000 a square meter. Here's the replacement cost. It will last 50 years or 75 years. That translates into an annualized cost. But that annualized cost, if you've put it away in a reserve, should handle the costs of the interim deck resurfacings, et cetera. So if I looked at my target budget requirements, that doesn't show up there. Might show up in your handout a bit better. But basically, I look at gravel roads, long-term sustainability and short-term sustainability, things like that, based on high-level budgets, based on the composition. And then this drills, if I double click on that, that drills down into the detail. I've got my improvement type, and then I've got the different classes, and then the lengths, and then what the cost is per length per the class. So creating program funding level is applicable to any asset. And if we go talk about roads, might be selective by surface type, gravel, hot mix, or surface treatment. This is reclamite, getting back to one of your questions. So that is a pavement preservation technique to use on hot mix asphalt. Usually goes on shortly after you pave it. And what it does is it restores the chemical properties to the asphalt cement. So you will get a longer, instead of maybe 17 years to repave, it might push it out to 20 or 22. So it's extending the life.
Starting to show there. So I guess, Stefan, that hot mix, or what is it you're calling it a?
Microcircular slurry seal.
No, it's a liquid, and it penetrates up to about 13 millimeters.
Yeah, it would depend what you mean by where. Cracking what you're getting?
Well, I don't know, but we only got a single lift where I think our planner would say maybe a double lift.
I would say you need 100 mils of asphalt, 2 lifts, 50 and 50 on any road as a minimum that you're putting down.
So we only have one, so would that help us?
I
to
think
get a longer wear of what we got?
that would be wasting your money on a single lift. So under other funding level considerations and analyses, everybody has to submit an FIR. The information's at the province. You can actually download everybody's information from the province from this. And guess what? The province looks at that stuff too. And if the information was recorded and collected and recorded with a common set of rules, which kind of doesn't exist so much anymore, there'd be direct head-to-head comparisons, but we still can compare some of the information at that 100,000 foot level. So FIR reports are based on the financial statements prepared in accordance with the Public Sector Accounting Board, hence the PSAB, which are audited by professional accountants. FIR and audited financial statements are required by the Municipal Act. They're not voluntary. If you don't submit them, you're not going to get some of your grants. It might be withheld. So there might be differences, as I said, in the FIR based on the reporting practices. So accounting policies also affect results. For example, the TCA, Tangible Capital Asset Policy, with respect to useful lives and amortization methods will have a huge impact on the net book value and amortization expenses. So that's what makes head-to-head comparison of some of the measures in there a little bit difficulty. So what do we want to look at in terms of making a grant application and then finding out maybe we didn't get the grant? Is how do we compare to other municipalities? So I do sub-consulting work for this accounting firm. And I've probably done 15 to 20 these service delivery reviews as a sub-consultant on this, and she's an accountant by trade. And she's pulled the next few slides information in here, but what the province will do is they're going to look at this information. And what we did was looked at the population and the population density. So we would look at, you're about 7,500 people, so we would look at maybe 5 to 10,000 person municipalities, and then look at your area in hectares and say how many people per hectare, and then that translates into, oh, you got a bunch of comparators around the province. So here's the guys you compare with. What's the provincial average? What are you doing? So those are the kind of things that we want to look at. So this is the kind of example that the province would look at. This is not your sorry, my hand went down there. This is not your information. So this is FIR information, but the municipality is looking at, here's a provincial average and here's what the municipality is spending. So you know what the province is going to say, well, you're spending below average, you can spend more because municipalities just like you are spending more. And if you looked at the asset sustainability ratio, which is just the capital additions as a percentage of the amortization expense, if you're under the 90%, they're going to tell you, hey, you should be spending more. And the target is less than 50 for the consumption rate ratio. So that's the inverse kind of that previous analysis. If we start to look at the reserves per household, if you have lots of reserves and low taxes, I think they're probably going to look at not giving you a grant. And this has happened to a number of my clients because their taxes were low, they weren't spending money, and they had money in the bank, so to speak. And then the debt burden per household, if you don't have a lot of debt, that might translate into some kind of a decision also. So you might want to consider the previous slides as an indicator of how an application might be reviewed. If the debts are low, the taxes are low, if you're underfunding your assets, sustainability is low and consumption's high, eligibility might be reduced. So it took quite a while to get there. So I had a slide that says, if you got to push the button, if you think you bought the software and you just push the button, we had to do all that preparation and analysis. Now we can push the button because we're at the intersection of reality and perception. So now we have software accurate condition ratings, treatments and their effects, asset classes and deterioration, and high level budgets. So we'll talk a little bit about performance modeling. Oops. I thought I had an underline coming out for there. I like to highlight this. It's from 1983. This is what 588.17 says. It's not new. It says, up at this top end of the curve, it's $1. As I slide down the curve, it's $4 to $5. So we want to be spending, if the roads are in that condition or assets are in that condition, that's the best bang for your buck. That's the best return on investment. That's the lowest life cycle cost. That's what the regulation says. So I was doing this presentation quite a few years ago, probably 12 years ago. And the finance officer said, here's what you're saying. You got to use this picture in every one of your slides now, or in every one of your presentations. So I do. So that is the message delivered. So if I'm at this end of the curve and just want to put down 20 or 30 or 40 millimeters of asphalt, I'm wasting my money. It might be a holding strategy. And if you do it as a legitimate holding strategy, that's one thing. But if you think that's fixing the road, it's just incorrect. So bad planning is buying a new saddle for an old horse. So we want to do the right treatment, keep those good roads good. So here's our curve. And at the top end of the curve, this is what it translates into is we're going to do gravel road resurfacing, surface treatment, slurry or micro, other preservations. And then we get down to the point of a resurfacing one lift. And then we resurface two lifts, major rehab, reconstruct. But as I go down that curve, I have a decreasing return on investment and an increasing cost. So in terms of the regulation does not say capital and operating. The regulation says spend the money at the right time on the right treatment. So I like to consider everything we're spending, even although that might be operating, as a reinvestment amount. And that's what we really want to do is spend there. If we artificially say, oh, we can only spend so much in operations or so much in capital, we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot when it comes to asset management. And I'll use the example of a bigger center. If we went to a Whitby or a Pickering or a Milton on the other side of Toronto, and you started to say, oh, we can only spend so much in operating, well, that resurfacing project might be an operating cost. So all of those subdivisions that went in, we're going to say, no, we're not paving them because we have a rule. It's an artificial rule about operating. We got to really think about what the effect on the asset is. So if we miss that window, now it's going to cost us 2, 3, 4 times more because we missed that window. So we got to consider all of the expenses in terms of asset management. You can define it however you want in your budget, but to come up with your plan, it's the aggregate total of those operating, like the high level operating stuff, gravel roads, crack sealing, surface treatment combined with the capital. That should be what you make your model out of. And then if I slide in my 1983 slide, it all fits together. So you can see nothing's new in asset management. The minimum outcome is to maintain the condition, preferably improve it. OREG 58817 requires the condition of the asset group to be maintained over a 10-year period. And again, I'll just reinforce my thoughts on that is I don't think you need a plan road by road by road for 10 years. I think you want to get the right budget for 10 years and then update the program based on the updated condition ratings over time. So the performance model should optimize available funding, prioritize the projects that are the best return on investment, or in the speak of 58817, the lowest life cycle cost treatment. And to test that model, we need to have a range of the funding. So I start to look at it this way. It's a little bit easier explained maybe on the next slide. This is a municipality I did a few years ago. Capital depreciation, almost 22 million. And then I've got resurfacing, reclamite they use, 190 for crack sealing, single surface treatment, and gravel road resurfacing. They didn't have many gravel roads. But if I took that number, 21.9, and then 10.2, I now have a window. So if I built a road system perfectly and it was failing perfectly, this gives me a ballpark of where I should be to sustain the condition of the system. So if all I had to do was these activities here, that would be my preservation budget or short-term sustainability, and it looks a bit like that. So then I would have that window. This is from a different municipality, but you can do it with any agency. There's my funding window. I want to be spending in that range to be sure I'm at least not losing any ground. The blue line is an average. If I wanted to run a model that said keep the average at a certain level, then you have big fluctuations every year with what the expenses would be, and that would not make you real popular. If taxes go down, you're a hero, and they go up, not so much. So this is just another example of the same thing. So we want to be in that window. And in this case, I've plotted on what we anticipate the condition is going to be over time. So the effects of funding, average funding is 1.58 versus 1.8 in this one. And how the funding is applied is affected by the model. So we can maintain the system by the best return on investment, or we can spend a set funding amount. And I know this is getting a little bit complicated, but the idea is there are tools out there, the tools to help you make a decision about what your programming should be. So going back a couple of slides, that thinking about getting away from calling this operating or limiting it to operating and limiting so much capital in a given year is a paradigm shift for municipalities. This slide's been in my presentation for about 20 years. So I started saying this when I was still a municipal person, and we started to think about it's got to be a reinvestment amount, because if I miss that window, I'm going to be spending more money than I wanted. So those arbitrary limitations through categorization as capital or operating will result in reduced performance at a given funding level. Opportunities to undertake the right treatment at the right time or condition will be missed. So I had time one winter, so what I did is I took this smaller road system, $2 million budget, and I plotted up 75 years, and you can see I'm not exceeding my 2 million a year, but you can see the fluctuations in every treatment every year. So that's essentially doing the right treatment at the right time. So your typical model calculations, I can skew the model in any direction you want. For some municipalities, they want it weighted for condition and the minimum maintenance standards. So we can do that. Return on investment, needs savings, lowest condition, best condition, or I can customize it, as I said, by traffic condition or priority rating. Return on investment aligns most closely with the requirements of 58817. Just to give you an idea, if I have a set funding level and I do what the regulation says, right treatment, right time, lowest life cycle activity, I'll get that performance. At the same funding level, if I pick essentially worse, this is going to select a high volume road that's in bad condition. So if I drive the decision making that way, you can see there's a distinct difference in the performance over time. So that's what we want to keep in mind too, is that effect.
Dave, when I see those graphs like that, can you look at all municipalities and come up with that standard graph? Because
Yes.
if you've got the city of Oshawa, their tax base is a lot higher than what our tax base is. So if you're saying you said 1.5 going to road management all the time, that would be difficult. Because then we would be looking at like a 2 or 2.5 million budget for the roads, which we aren't there. So I mean, I'm just wondering if there is if that fluctuates a little bit, or is it a standardization that you're using?
It's that can be specific to any agency that I have the database for. I can run the model and say best return on investment or worst first and see the difference in performance. With respect to funding, you're completely right, because I did the town of Whitby a bunch of times too. And I would say their road system about that time was maybe 525 kilometers. And yours is, let's say 450 for argument's sake. You got 7,500 people, they got 120,000 people. It's a whole different cost per household. And I'll maybe talk about that a little bit later, but it's really what the effect has been with the removal of grants and things like that 30 years ago is that's what you're feeling now to some extent, right? And the cost per household is affected. So Delhi or Township of Delhi, when I was the director there, it was about a 490 kilometer road system, but it had almost 16,000 people. So the road costs would be half as much per household to do the same thing as your municipality. So you have to make decisions about what level of service you want to have and deliver, and there's a cost attached to that. I don't know if I answered your question.
You did.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
Well, no, you did. I don't know what our amount would be, but that's another discussion.
I can probably figure that out for you. So for us, as I said earlier, I just take that number out of 20 and make it a number out of 100. And by definition, that is a pavement condition index because it's a number between 1 and 100. And so I use that information. And here's how I got a bunch of tabs across the top. But the drop down here is I can pick customization, best condition, worst condition, or return on investment. So that's a lot of the softwares operate in a similar fashion. I can also customize it a bit and say, I don't want to exceed this expenditure for a given activity in a year. And that's the output that we get. And the output I've graded out here so you don't know who it is. But you can see what the model does is it's got a check mark that's it's selected as that's a preferred project. That's one that should be in your budget. And it does calculations, it does billions of calculations. So it calculates every treatment for every road for every year. And then it picks out what would be the best bang for the buck if I just let it do its own thing. Here's what you get in an output. It's similar to what we saw before. So you can see a variability year to year to year with different treatments. It's just because it's picking that right treatment at the right time. This is from a real road system. This is their existing budget. And you can see here, I have marginal differences here with the preservation, what I call preservation, which I now call short-term sustainability, and I've weighted it differently. And then if I spend a lot of money, optimal budget, you can see it will, this was in poor condition, it would drop over time, but then it would eventually improve. So that's the kind of things that we want to know. What's the outcome going to be? We showed this slide before. This is a lower volume system. This is more like a 401 type system. So the plans, the performance model has to match what your system says. if I started to talk about water and sewer, and we can apply those very same principles for water and sewer. So this is water and sewer combined for a smaller municipality. The average annual expenditure is 4.42 million. So this highlights when the work's going to be done and how much we're going to spend. The bottom graphic highlights the condition. So what we see here is if I'm above the line, that $4 million is something that should go into the reserve every year. So that's your revenue from your water. It goes into the reserve. You don't need to spend $4 million every year. You apply this concept to bridges too. But if I'm above the line, I'm taking money from the reserve or I'm borrowing money. If I'm below the line, I'm paying off debt or there's money accumulating in the reserve. That's really what's the simplest. And then you can see my condition is staying somewhere mid-60s and higher over time. So that's where I want to be with the condition of the system. This is the same data, but here's, the expenditure just spending, the average is 2.7. But if I let the model spend whatever it needs to spend, you can see I can keep the condition up here. If I limit the expenditure to 2.7, which is the average, you can see a distinctly different condition of the water system over time. So I think that's an important takeaway to do the right treatment at the right time. And those are graphs repeated from the previous page. Strict structures can do the same thing. We talked about that a bit earlier. So I want to do the right treatment at the right time. And Dave might recognize one of those slides. Generally, what happens in the model from a pavement perspective is the best bang for the buck is crack sealing, microsurfacing or other preservation, resurfacing 1 or 2 lifts. If these activities are undertaken at the right time and the right condition of the life cycle, then your pavement costs are optimized. Programming in urban environments has to be vetted with other asset demands, cross-asset integration, and that may change the improvement type. The process we described through here, I did focus on roads because everybody kind of gets them a bit better, but we talked about other assets and you can apply these principles to other assets also. And all have to be included in the decision-making process in order to make decisions and most effective program. And don't forget the team. So I usually write this to staff, but the team is other staff and council. So I think the best thing to do is keep in, because this is a huge subject matter. So I think the more times you're in front of council or telling them or explaining or doing these training things, the better it is because it's a lot to absorb. Just on the cross-asset integration themes, just looking at what might occupy my road allowance and summary and conclusions. Software can and should be used to develop your asset management plan. I believe you need a performance model to simply meet the requirements of 588.17. You could do it manually, but I think it's going to be prohibitive from a time perspective. Regardless of the software that you select, there is a lot of time for setting up the software. It's huge.
That's 120 hours you're referring to?
That was just for that one part. That was just for the deterioration curves.
Okay.
The rest of it took more. So I had this foolish idea when I became a consultant is like, yeah, I'll get a job and I'll have a client that'll pay me to do that. And I quickly found out that's not going to happen. So I started doing it on my own time, but keeping track of the hours. And then I hit 120 and I said, I don't think I'm going to keep track of the hours anymore. I just know it's a lot of work to get this up and running. So then I could offer it as a, when I was bidding on work, I could say, hey, I can do this and that and the next thing. So the caveats would be design construction standard. You get what you inspect, not what you expect. Deterioration curves and performance, understand how your assets will perform. What are the unit costs and giving in the caveats. Regular condition ratings of asset is required to confirm, modify, evolve the deterioration curves of any assets. And attributions as shown there. I'm happy to answer any more questions. We did have a couple as we went through. As I said, it's a big subject. It's complex and at the highest level, it's fairly simple, but the more you drill down, the more complex it gets. And it's a lot to get a hold of in one presentation.
Thank you, Dave. Does any members of council have any questions or comments? Go ahead, Mike.
Guess I always look at, what our budget is versus what we spend now in public works. And if you can't afford to do what you're talking about, how do you prioritize stuff? Because if we got 480 kilometers of road link and we do 15 kilometers a year, 24 years. Right?
Yeah, that's past the life expectancy of any surface. So it's gonna deteriorate.
So we're constantly spending way too much money on what we do,
On maintenance?
do,
Okay,
because we can't afford to keep up with the 10-year plan.
well, I don't have any, great suggestions there. I might later.
Through you, Mayor Logal. So that's what this is about. This is about getting planning involved with our road infrastructure and asset management. Asset management in its entirety. It's not just about meeting the July 1st deadline and being compliant. It's about the future of the township. And are we spending our dollars wisely? How should we be spending them? And in discussing a model of how we would be able to collect that data to allow us to make those decisions. And part of this is the education to council, because it is council that ultimately makes the decision through our budget.
Thank you, Dave. Good points. Anybody else? Well, thank you, Dave.
You're welcome. You can stand and I will sit.
We're gonna take, well, should we?
Yeah, take a bite.
Can I get a mover and a seconder to receive David's presentation for information? By Deputy Mayor Stover. Seconder,
He got his hand up, but anyway.
I got Councillor Booth. That's the first hand I seen. Any comments? All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you, David. We're gonna go into closed session. But, well, we'll go into closed session and then we will take a 5-minute break after we get in there. So,
I think we are in.
okay. Okay. Before we go into closed, part of the agenda included an education portion. But we've just, clerk has told us now that's not necessary. So I'm just asking that we amend our initial agenda to exclude the 3.1, which is education, from motion to go into close. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to read the motion that was in a closed, that the special council meeting of April 23rd, 2025 move into a closed session under Municipal Act Section 239 2B, personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, labor relations or employee negotiations, litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or local board, and the 3.1 education regarding safety matters, CQP negotiations update, and potential litigation, as well as the senior of the year nominations. Can I get a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Ainsworth and seconded by Councillor O'Neill. All in favor? Okay. And before I call the vote, I've also got to make sure everybody understands that the education clause was added unnecessarily, and I'm asking for that be amended to remove education from the motion to go into closed. Well, I already got the mover and second. Okay, moved by Deputy Mayor Stover, seconded by Councillor Booth. Any further questions? All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you, everyone. Oh, now I gotta, wait a minute, I gotta call another one.
Thank you for doing this.
Do I have to read that one too? Have you already got a mover in a second for that? one?
You have a move.
Okay. This is just to call a vote on the amended agenda. All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you for getting that all straightened out, and we'll take a 10-minute break and come back.